Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 20 of the CUInsight Experience. My name is Randy Smith. I am one of the co-founders and the publisher of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest from around the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Miss Caroline Willard. Caroline is the president and CEO of the Cornerstone Credit Union League, CU Resources, and the Cornerstone Foundation. She's also a current board member of CUNA and one of my scuba diving and travel buddies. Make sure to check out the show notes for one of our favorite pictures together where we have an active volcano as the backdrop from a dive trip we took to Indonesia. We've spent a lot of time together during surface intervals between dives and have always really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you do too. We talked about a lot on this episode: gender diversity and the need for more inclusion in our movement. We also talked about innovation and disruption in credit unions. Before she was leading the charge at the Cornerstone League, she was the executive vice president of markets and strategy at Co-op Financial Services. So she knows a thing or two about innovation and helping move this credit union movement forward. There was so much good in the leadership and life hacks portion of this show. Caroline shared just a ton of leadership lessons that I think we will all learn from. As always, we wrapped it up with the rapid fire questions and got to know her a little bit better. We did our best. We tried to not make this all about diving and travel, two things that we're both passionate about, and actually talk about some serious leadership and life hacks in this episode. And I think we did a pretty good job, but it did sneak its way in. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Miss Caroline Willard. Enjoy. Caroline, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Randy. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, me too. I was so looking forward to this. You and I, there's just so much we could talk about as dive buddies. We've had a lot of time to have long conversations during surface intervals. So I will do my best to try not to make this episode all about diving and travel, something that I know we're both passionate about, but we'll actually talk about many other things here, but I'm sure it will work its way in. I wanted to jump right into the questions, and this is quite honestly the furthest thing from diving and travel, right? But in a recent conversation you and I were having, you brought up how important diversity is, gender diversity, also inclusion amongst our movement's leaders. As a CEO that also happens to be female and a CUNA board member, what's the first step? What changes do you see that we need to make?
Definitely, I think the first step is that we've got to start trusting the data that's out there. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to mention the McKinsey study that showed that companies that have women on the boards of directors perform better economically, right? This isn't just about altruism. This isn't just a moral imperative. This is, if we want high-performing organizations, we'd better have diversity in the leadership on the boards of directors, on the executive management teams, because it just makes good sense. And oh, by the way, we learn from each other along the way, right? I mean, I think that's one of my favorite things when I'm on a board and not everyone thinks exactly like I do. That makes for a stronger organization. So I think that's the first step. There's a lot of steps to it.
I know. Well, first of all, anything that we talk about, we will link to in the show notes. So we will link to that study that you mentioned. I know recently we were together and you, Jill, and I were having a conversation about the difference between diversity and inclusion. And that's kind of, to me, it sounds a lot like what you were just talking about with the different ideas. Like we don't all have to be the same. Could you I guess, maybe expand on that a little bit?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that females, people of color, people of all different types of, diverse backgrounds are going to contribute to a conversation differently. We're going to have different life experiences. And that absolutely shapes how we approach problems. So I know that when I have served on various boards, that, one of the things that is really helpful is to have honest conversations and just really appreciate those differences amongst each other and not just have it be a grudge match where we're trying to wear each other down. But I think you can only do that if you actually have diversity in the first place. There is a wonderful individual who runs a credit union in Louisiana. Maybe you know Ronaldo Hardy.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you've met him. He talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and he compares it to gumbo. And he said that if you're making gumbo, diversity is having all of the right ingredients sitting on your kitchen counter. And inclusion is making sure that you get all of those ingredients into the pot when you're making the gumbo. And equity is making sure that the ratios of those ingredients are in proper order, right? So that you have a balance and so that the dish turns out well. And thank you, Ronaldo, for letting me steal that, because I think it's so evocative, not only of his region, but I think it helps us all understand why it's not just about following a formula, it's getting that balance right. It's not about quotas. It's about having just a great mix that tastes delicious in the end, maybe.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. I had not heard him say that before. So I love that. That's awesome. I know this topic's important to both of us, and it's the reason that I did want to lead with it. Do you see this change, the push for change, transforming our movement to look more like the population as a whole, coming at the individual level, the credit union level? Is it systematic, at that national level, or does it have to be a combination of all three?
I hate to be pat, but yes, I do think it needs to be a combination of all three. We just had a conversation here yesterday at Cornerstone where we were talking about how do we approach this? And while we know that there is definitely something brewing at the national level, and there are a lot of folks talking about it, we feel like we can't wait for there to be some, let's all lock arms together and this is what it's going to look like and let's all sign our name on the dotted line. No, we're going to start something right now and start making some changes, whether it's, for example, we have a women's leadership conference every year. And in the past, we've sort of chuckled about, well, we'll have a few men in the room and they'll be invited, but they probably will not want to attend. And no, that's not okay anymore. If we're talking about inclusiveness and inclusion and diversity, why wouldn't we have men in the room when we're talking about issues of diversity? So I know I'm going to start at the individual level. I'm absolutely talking to my team about what this means and how it affects our hiring. We, within Credit Union Resources, we have an executive search firm. And so I had a conversation with Marcus Cotton, who heads that up. And I said, well, what are boards asking you? Are they saying you need to have a slate that looks like our community? He said, well, the more progressive ones are. And I said, well, we got to change that. We got to be the ones to start that conversation. So to answer your question more succinctly, I think that we've each got to understand what it means for us. And the organizations that we lead, we've got to define what we are committing to at the organizational level. And I think from there, it starts a groundswell. And that's what I can't wait to see when it's really inexcusable to be on the sidelines anymore and we're all locking arms.
It may take time, but it's a beautiful goal to be heading towards. I agree with you. If someone wants to get more involved, they want to work towards creating more seats at the table, what advice would you have for them?
Well, I think that there are two things, in my opinion. First of all, I'm a big believer in leading with the why. Why is this important? And that's why I keep referencing studies that talk about why. This isn't just about women getting more strident or militant. And this isn't about some, moral imperative. This is about running better businesses. I know that Jill and you and I have talked about, the war for talent is real, right? And if we want to have vibrant workplaces, we've got to make sure that people feel welcome. And they're not going to feel welcome if they don't see themselves in the leadership. So I think that's the why. But I know that for myself, I wasn't able to get clear on what this meant to me until I actually wrote a piece. I wrote something. I internalized it enough to the point where I could put some thoughts on paper. And for me, that's currently a private piece. There'll be some point at which I publish it somewhere, somehow. But
I know a place.
You know anyone?
Yeah, I might know somebody. You might have some connections. So,
boy, that was really smooth of me, don't you think?
Yeah, there you go.
But I honestly, I was thinking about that last night. I think that helps someone like me who has, thoughts all across the board on this topic, it really helped me to solidify what my thoughts are. And, once I do publish that, then it belongs to everyone. Right. And then I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to raise awareness by sharing our thoughts. And I know that when I've read other people's pieces, I build on that and say, you know what, they said something that really resonates with me. And so we build this kind of collective body of work together.
I hear you there. That I journal, and that's been something that's been on my mind a lot recently as well, was just how do I individually, as a middle-aged dude, be a part of just pushing us all forward, kind of moving that bar and not being on the sidelines like, oh, that's not my fight to have, right? Is there any advice that you would give? Is it different at all if you're talking to a woman or a man in this situation?
Yeah, and I'm going to say this at the risk of sounding like I'm deriding my own gender, but I do think that women need to lead with facts, that this is an emotional topic, but this is a time when we need to be factual. We need to be calm about it and have a thoughtful conversation, because I've had men tell me that they're scared to enter into this conversation because they think it's going to turn into a shouting match. And so whatever the environment is, I just think that there's a segment of the population, right or wrong, who will tune women out if they think they're being overly emotional. And so that's been my personal experience. It may not be true for everyone, but I do think, leading as a female, that's something that I actually had an executive coach tell me that once. She said, Caroline, I know that you've got a lot of passion and that's part of your brand. But when you're having a conversation with the other gender, you might just want to be sensitive to how they're receiving it. And not all men receive emotional arguments as well as women do. Not all humans do, right? So we've got to consider the audience always.
Wow, that is something. I sometimes have a hard time controlling my passion, so that would be that's probably something I could learn from as well, from what you got from your coach. So, and
to be clear, it's not about being robotic,
right? Yeah,
it's that we've got people, like I said, people receive things in different ways, and so combining some of that passion, if that's what's authentic to you. I mean, I do believe that is important, but, if we're going to connect with a lot of different people who come from a lot of different places, we also have to have the facts in there. And then, honestly, I think that I love what you just said about not wanting to sit on the sidelines. And that's what I would encourage men to ponder. Are they sitting on the sidelines, or is it time to jump in and just, get in the mix and learn what they can do to be part of the change?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a topic, honestly, that we could do multiple shows on, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it in the future. I do want to, like I said in the beginning, there's so much that I knew that we could talk about. So I want to switch gears a little bit. I feel you're uniquely qualified to answer the question about disruption. In your previous life at Co-op, you were on the leading edge of, credit union innovation. Now you're at the Cornerstone League. You just mentioned CU Resources. I mean, so you're seeing the war for talent and what's happening out there. I mean, I know you spend an unreal amount of time running around meeting with credit unions in your state. Could you tell us about the disruption you're seeing and how are your credit unions responding to it? And you're on the CUNA board, so credit unions across the board. How do you feel they're responding to the disruption we're seeing?
The thing I always say is that credit unions are like snowflakes and that no two are alike. And what's awesome is that I see credit unions talk about knowing their audience. They adapt and really lead with what's important to their membership. So I see Dave Blazard down in Houston doing a complete digital transformation. I mean, he talks about wanting to be as seamless for his credit union members as Amazon is for shoppers, right? And so that comparison's been drawn before, but Dave is putting his money where his mouth is, and he is looking at all of his member-facing processes and really considering the status quo is not good enough anymore, and what do we do to create an Amazon experience for credit union members? I see Crystal Long out in El Paso, and she, talk about a field of membership, being originally government employees, And people think, well, gosh, some people are never going to embrace video tellers, for example. Not my membership, right? Well, Crystal's saying, no, I'm going to mix that in. And she has a few branches who have no live tellers in them. They're just video screens with people on the back end in a centralized location. And I love that because she's mixing it up. She's creating a different system of delivery channels for her membership. And for those who prefer really that kind of more automated experience. And, by the way, I think their throughput is faster at that branch too. For those members, they have a different kind of experience. If they want a traditional branch, they can go to a traditional branch. And so she's turning upside down what people's expectations were of her service delivery. So those are just two. I mean, I could go. I've got over 500 credit unions, and they're
you have a lot. I know we had Maria Martinez on one of the early shows, and I mean, she talked about just even how much the community had changed, and how you had to keep pace with it, where she is down at, what is a border federal credit union, right? So
yes, yeah. And she reaches across the border and works with the consulate in Mexico. And yeah, Maria, I've got some amazing folks who are members of this league. So great to work with.
It seems like it. I've since you've been there, I've enjoyed getting to know some of them more. So another, and this kind of, I think this goes along and fits right in with it, but from previous conversations, I'll use the phrase, I know you're kind of that grow or die person. You need to see growth. Two questions. One, why is growth, in your opinion, so important for credit unions and credit union relevancy? And then also on a personal level, why is growth important to you? Yeah, well,
it makes me absolutely insane when people say that they're feeling good about 7 to 9% growth year over year. That's not good enough. I mean, we could do so much better. And I think it's so much harder to compete with banks, with fintechs, when you don't have scale. And that is one thing that I learned by working at Co-op. I saw credit unions really struggling to get the attention of a technology provider because they were one credit union, right? And they really weren't that big of a credit union. And so we are so much better when we collaborate in order to bring that technology to bear. But we all need to be growing constantly, or it's too easy to get left on the sidelines for sure. And I am a Myers-Briggs ENTJ, and that means that people are going to be able to be armchair psychologists now, right?
Absolutely.
That's a little frightening. But one of the things about an ENTJ is that we are lifelong learners. And I believe strongly that if I'm not constantly learning new approaches to the way I do business, that I'm going to become irrelevant. And I always have that anxiety nipping at my heels that I just have to stay current. And that is what helps us grow. So that's why I've taken on additional boards and other responsibilities. I was so excited to be elected to the CUNA board, and I'm seeing all kinds of things that I'm going to learn in that environment. So super exciting time in my life.
That fits, yeah. Nonstop, Caroline. All right. So I wish, okay, this is a podcast, so everybody won't be able to see your reaction like I will to this question, but what is your reaction to the phrase, but that's the way we've always done it?
Well, I think I might actually say that's the way to get a severance package. Maybe that's a little bit harsh, but really, honestly, an unwillingness to experiment and continually improve on what went before. That kind of person is not someone who'll make it on my team, because I think we can all improve every single day. And sure, there are some things that are tried and true, but we have to be examining, are they tried and true, or are they just rusty and stale? And I am a huge believer in continuous improvement, for sure.
So a question, and I've asked this on previous episodes, but I'd love your thoughts on this. As a leader, is there something that you do? Some of us like change more than others. So, I mean, there's kind of a sliding scale on how comfortable, at least I've found, that people are with change. Is there something you do to help people on your team that maybe are a little bit change averse kind of make their way through it? Or?
Yeah. I think it's comfortable or comforting to show where new ideas have worked elsewhere. And so, I made trips last year, for example, to the Ohio Credit Union League and to the California Credit Union League, because they're doing some great things. And by the way, so is Cornerstone. But I think by going out and seeing how other folks are tackling the same set of problems and seeing that they are being successful with it, wildly successful in some cases, it's easy then to bring those ideas back and say, look, it's not going to hurt us. We can try it. And then the other thing that I think my team is believing now is that we're just going to try a lot, and sometimes we're going to fail. But as long as we pivot quickly and move on to the next thing, we're just failing forward. And I know a lot of folks are saying that, but it's true. And we've already had a couple of things that we've tested, and we realized, hey, yeah, that didn't quite work the way that we thought it was going to, but that's okay. And we got to just keep evolving and moving forward. And it takes time, though. It's not just that I've got some employees. I got one employee who's been, and you know her, she's been here almost 40 years. And I'll tell you, it's amazing to see how completely willing she is to this. We've got this all-in campaign that we're doing internally, that we're all in for the change. She's one of the cheerleaders for this thing, which shocked me at first because she's been here forever, but she's pumped up and excited. And I think it's because she's really starting to believe that we can experiment, we can have fun with this. And, I'm fond of saying we don't make bombs here. If we make a mistake, no one's going to lose an arm.
Right.
It's okay.
Would that employee you mentioned to be Karen from the best DE class ever?
Well, her name is Karen, but she can't be from the best DE class ever because that would be November of 2018 when I went through DE. So.
I think Karen and I would both disagree and say it had to be winter 2015. So, which happened to be in Texas, in Dallas. I think it was one of the only years they did it there. So there's
oh, that's funny.
Bring that full circle. So
I went to Madison in November. It was a little chilly.
That's awesome. I'd like to start transitioning to the second part of the show. I do have one final question, I guess, here, and that's is there a belief that you see held by credit unions currently that you think will just fundamentally change in the relatively near future?
Yeah, I think that, and I saw this in 11 years at Co-op, that we've for a long time hung our hats on the fact that we're member-owned cooperatives and that's going to be enough to differentiate us. And I do believe that's important, and I am a DE, and I believe in the cooperative principles, but to the consumer, that's not what differentiates us. And I don't want to see us, abandon that as one of the things that we believe in, but it can't be what we think differentiates us. And in fact, sitting on the CUNA board, I have been very involved, and even before I was on the board, I've been very involved in the awareness initiative that CUNA has been working on for 2 years now. And one of the things that they found in their research is that, for example, the word cooperative falls completely flat when you talk to a consumer. They don't get it. They don't really understand what a cooperative is, and it's too abstract. And so I think that we need to start positioning ourselves differently. And, our secret sauce a lot of times is the way that we serve our communities. And, that snowflake idea, right? Everyone's very individual and serving communities in the way that's most meaningful to that community. And I think that's part of our secret sauce, along with, the fact that we collaborate and we're so different from the banking industry, which by the way, I've worked at a thrift, and there was no collaboration with the thrift down the street. And so I'm so proud to be part of a movement that does lean on one another.
There's a credit union that's a good fit for everybody, right? So you just have to find the one. I'd like to move forward the leadership and life hacks portion of the show, and just start right off with what inspired you to take the gig as president and CEO of the Cornerstone Credit Union League?
Well, it was an interesting time in my career. And I, was going through a leadership transition at Co-op, and I love that organization. I still do. I'm still friends with all the folks there. But I felt like I was ready for the next thing. And I was approached by Marcus Cotton, who's now one of my employees, who did the search. Our executive search firm did the search.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And I was approached by him. And at first I said, no, I don't know. Is that the best next thing for me? And then I started really thinking about it. And I thought, I believe that our national and our state or regional trade associations are at a pivotal point. And it's time for us to redefine our value propositions. We have choice now. Our members can choose any variety, any combination of support from their national and regional trade associations. And so I love leading from a place of a value proposition. I love creating value for credit unions. And so, not to say that I have any magical words of wisdom here, but I love discovering what is the next iteration of what a trade association is in this movement. And so that was the inspiration is how do I take what I learned? I did product development and strategic planning, a whole bunch of stuff at Co-op. How do I take that and apply it to a trade association that not only does advocacy, but does education, and oh, by the way, also develops products and services. And so that's been really fun to get to apply it in a completely different environment. And, the second thing is that I want credit unions to win. And I've always wanted credit unions to win. And if I do my job well in the Cornerstone region with my team, and I've got a fantastic team, if I do it well, then maybe we'll be the ones to hit on the winning model. And wouldn't that be great? Because, we'll all collaborate and learn from one another along the way. So all of that is what inspired me to take the job.
How great is it that Marcus got to hire his own boss? That's pretty cool.
Lucky, right?
Yeah, there he goes. He's like, I think this is the one. Has the inspiration, you've been there a couple of years now. Has the inspiration changed at all with time on the job?
Well, I would be lying if I didn't say that I've been made to pause a few times because of political realities. I mean, it's a lot of credit unions who are counting on Cornerstone to make the right decisions. And so I'll give you for instance, we have a new set of bylaws going to a vote at our annual meeting in a couple of weeks. And we took a swing at that initially, and our membership said, nope, they didn't like what we came up with. And so it was humbling, to be sure, but it taught me a really important lesson. And that is that when you're running an organization like this, where there are so many constituents, there are so many people who really care about the decisions that you make, you have to listen twice as much as you talk, which is hard to do because I talk a lot.
I share that with you. So it's tough for me too.
Yeah. You have to, communicate a vision, listen really carefully for feedback, incorporate change, and then bring people along thoughtfully. And that has changed my leadership style quite a bit. For the better, I hope. I think those are good lessons for anyone to learn, but they were tough ones to sort of take on the chin at the beginning.
A question I had written down a few ahead, I will jump to because I think what you just said just plays right into it. What do you consider your leadership style, and how has that changed going from Co-op to the Cornerstone League?
Well, I think that it would be impossible to work for someone like Stan Holland for 10 years and not take away some of what his leadership style is. And we used to joke that if you had a one-on-one meeting with Stan, he would give you a project in the beginning of the meeting. And by the end of the meeting, he'd ask you how that project was coming along. and I've done that. I found that just like you say that you're never going to do the things that your parents did when you become a parent, it's the same thing when you become a CEO. And I said, well, I'm never going to do that. I'm going to support my team and be patient. And no, I have exactly the same extremely high sense of urgency. I also believe that you can be too methodical and too cautious, and you can miss out on opportunities if you are. And that, my friends, is the Stan Holland School of Management, and I got a degree in that. So I know they would say I have a high sense of urgency. But the other thing is we have a saying here, and I certainly don't want to offend anyone who's a parent and has a beautiful child, but we have a saying here, and that is that we can't be afraid to call each other's babies ugly.
I love it.
We have to be willing to challenge each other, and in a respectful way, for sure. But it's my opinion, and I think you know this about me because we're friends, that being too polite doesn't get us anywhere. We have to be respectful, but challenge each other. And then the other thing that they would say is that I love to laugh. I said it earlier. We don't make bombs here. We can take the work seriously, but we cannot take ourselves too seriously, or it just stops being fun. And I love to laugh.
That I know about you. We've had quite a few laughs together during our travels and dive trips and all that good stuff. You spoke just quite a bit about your team there. What would you say is the greatest strength of your team?
Well, we've got a blend of people who've got great institutional knowledge. I mentioned Karen earlier with the 40 years of experience. And, newer to the team is Barb Lohman, and she came from Fiserv not quite a year ago. And so it's wonderful to see how the institutional knowledge blends with that outside experience. So we're grounded, but we have some new blood. And I guess I'd have to put myself in that category too. I'm still pretty new. I've only been on the job for 2 years. And so we've got that, and we've got a lot of people who've worked at credit unions. And so that creates some empathy for the folks that we're actually serving. And I think that's our secret sauce, is that we really care about credit unions. And it's because a lot of us have come from credit unions. And, we've built it up to this is a family. I always joke that going to GAC is like a family reunion or a high school reunion. I think that's what makes us special, is that love of credit unions.
This is completely a scratch my own itch question that I just thought about while you were talking. As you said, you're 2 years into the position. You've brought in some new people that are from outside the organization, obviously, as well. Is there advice that you would give to maybe a new leader on how to blend the, let's say, the older culture with the new culture that you're trying to bring into the organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel lucky that I got to work with CUES as I did, serving on that board, because I saw their very deliberate efforts in transforming a culture, because they had a new CEO, very similar situation, and a new CEO who had followed a long time, who had followed Fred Johnson. And in that case, and in ours as well, it's super important to celebrate what came before, because I think it's really offensive to come in and imply that everything that happened before you arrived was junk. That's not the word I wanted to use. But all the new ideas are the best ideas, right? So celebrate what came before, and then recognize that there are going to be people who embrace the change, hold them up as role models to the rest of the company, celebrate them in front of the rest. And it can't be just the CEO standing in the front of the room. There have to be internal champions. And so it takes time. It takes time for those folks to sort of see themselves in the new vision. And that's what I think is starting to grab hold here, as people say, I get it. We're now all about, creating value and doing so in an efficient and effective way. And those who can see that vision, and it's because we've invested time in articulating that vision, they become role models for the others. And that's, I think, when it really grabs hold.
As a person who sometimes struggles with patience, I have to imagine, you're coming in guns a-blazing, right? Like, it just want things to move quickly. But that's, I think for any leader at any level, if they're taking over a new team, that what you just talked about, there's super important. There's one of those nuggets we look for. As a leader, is there something that your team at Cornerstone has heard you say so many times they can finish your sentence?
Yes, that our senior leadership team meeting is a safe place, that we can challenge one another, and we can, respectfully raise our voices if we need to, and get passionate, challenge the norm, challenge the status quo, really get into it. But before we walk out that door, we'd all better be unified. And we better take a unified message out to the rest of the team and not say, whew, you should see how contentious it was today. That's not cool. We don't have what we call leakage from that meeting. I hope we don't. but the norm that we've set is that we can really let loose in that meeting, but that it stays in the meeting. And so that allows people to really be honest with one another. So saying that this is a safe place, and sometimes I'll remind them right before I say something that I know is going to be controversial. I'll say, remember, this is our safe place. We need to talk about this, and I need you to not hold back. And oh boy, they take me at my word now.
They believe you. That's good. Well, it means you've created the safe space. When you think back earlier in your career, is there a mistake that you made or that you see young leaders make often?
Well, I've said this before, and I actually made someone angry once by saying this, but I'm still going to say it because it's still true for me. And that is that I stayed in one discipline too long. I grew up as a marketer, and that felt safe. And I knew that, and I knew all the jargon, and it felt really good to be really smart at that. But I stayed in marketing positions a little longer than I should have. And if I had reached out and really stretched and managed a P&L sooner in my career, I probably would have been a CEO sooner in my career. And it's uncomfortable. I can tell you, running product development at Co-op when I do not have a technology background, highly uncomfortable. And yet it's part of what rounded me out to the point that I was ready to be a CEO.
Oh, I love that. That's one of my favorite answers ever. That's why we're friends. Something else just from past conversations of ours. What's the difference in your opinion? I think this plays into your last answer, actually, between being fearless and reckless. I mean, this is a question that when I was thinking about it, I absolutely love it. Whether it's a business decision or career decision, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think that I can be fearless when I give myself the grace to possibly fail, but do it quickly. And that takes the fear out of it. That, we are all just experimenting all the time. And, you mentioned career decisions. It was a little scary to uproot myself from California, to move 1,400 miles away, to take a job that I didn't know that I was going to succeed at it. But I do feel that you build a foundation, and you know what your own inner strengths are. And I think that because I've had executive coaching, for example, I do know what my own shortcomings are. I'm acutely aware of them, and I'm sure my team is too. But knowing yourself is super important. But that's being fearless. So being reckless, what I've learned, it's when I don't ask good questions. I am a little headstrong, and I get excited about an idea and I just want to charge ahead. And I've had to really coach myself to pause for a second and anticipate the pitfalls, really ask the question you don't want to hear the answer to. And more times than not, that's what's prevented me from a disaster, is when I go to the person who I know is going to poke holes in my brilliant idea and get them to poke those holes. And if I still feel good about it after I've been through that conversation, all right. But a lot of times it makes me tweak the decisions that I'm about to make.
So I'm going to do something that I said I wasn't going to do a lot of in the beginning. But do you think, this is a personal question here, do you think travel has helped in that? You and I are both big travelers, and we love I think both of us have shared it before in conversations we've had, that we love that new experience. Do you think that, when you're talking about being fearless, is that kind of from the same ilk, right? Where you want to go experience new things. You want to ride in the back of a moped or dive into the, it's go into the great unknown. Do you think those tie in? Is it a personality thing? Like I said, this is completely scratching my own itch and us playing amateur psychologist.
Yeah. I think that curiosity is a trait that serves us well, both in our personal lives and in our professional lives. And that's the itch that I scratch by traveling. I want to go to the monkey forest in Bali and see what that's about. I want to go to the Great Barrier Reef and see if it's as great as everyone says it is. And oh, by the way, try Vegemite and decide that I will never eat Vegemite again. But I think what the way that leads, and by the way, I went to Australia, as you know, I went there alone.
Yep.
Because I had a break between the time that I left Co-op and started at Cornerstone. I had a month off, and I thought, if I'm not going to do it now, when am I going to do this? And So that took some of the fear out of traveling literally to the other side of the world and doing it on my own. I wasn't stupid about it. I took safety precautions, but by doing that, I immersed myself in a different culture and saw that there are other ways of doing things. I think that is directly translatable back to the professional life, is to see that we have to get out of our own comfort zones and see that there is a spectrum of ways to approach any problem, any opportunity as well.
I couldn't agree more. So much of the things that we're working on at CUInsight right now came from my time in Indonesia, when seeing digital nomads and how they were using technology to spread news and information. And it's like, we can do that for credit unions. So probably something like this podcast. Kind of jumping back a little bit, but we talked about you creating a culture that it's okay to fail and just make sure you fail fast, basically. Do you have any memorable failures that one that you look back on and you're like, I'm glad that turned out that way because it led to, a future opportunity or success?
Yeah. So I had one pretty spectacular failure that actually turned out well in the end. And at the time I was in charge of relationship management at Co-op, and we had been given the authority, the budget, to reprice some contracts, discount some client contracts, because we found that some folks were actually paying a little bit too much. And so I went through and I got really aggressive with that, and I way overshot the mark. And people loved me because I was giving away smoking deals. And don't get all excited if you're a Co-op client, because I'm not there anymore. So you can't even count on this anymore. But what the strange thing that happened, and even though I had to hold myself accountable for that, and I had some tough questions to answer, it actually led to Co-op being considered more of a value for the money. And it led to us having a different kind of approach and different kind of corporate discipline that ultimately was a really healthy thing for the company. It was an unintended consequence, but because I did kind of blow it. But in the end, it worked out okay. And it made Co-op a little bit more competitive in the marketplace. But it was not one of my finer moments in internal controls. Let's just put it that way.
Has there been a piece of advice or life lesson that you received that you find yourself going back to over and over during your career?
Yeah, I've mentioned Stan Holland before. And for anyone who knows Stan, they know that he can be a little direct. And one time we had this big problem we were working through, and I came in and I told him what I was doing to correct the problem. And he said, "Caroline, you're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic."
That's funny.
And I had to gulp a little bit and kind of swallow my pride. And I realized he was absolutely right. I was nibbling away at it, making incremental changes, when what I really needed to do was make a bold move. And that taught me a really important lesson, that sometimes what you have to do is turn what you know about a problem upside down, and maybe not hit the reset button, but really be bold in the way that you solve the problem. Because nibbling away at the edges, and there are a lot of these types of issues within credit unions, nibbling away at the edges is not going to take you to the next level.
That, leads into another question that I love asking is, when you do run into a problem, do you have some kind of hack that you do to flip that around or take a look at it from a different angle?
Yeah, I do. I was fortunate enough to, when I was getting an MBA at Pepperdine, they offered a class. I don't even know if they still offer it. It was called Creativity in Management or something like that. And we literally had a book that we used. It was called Thinker Toys, and I think it's still in print. And it was a whole lot of whiteboarding types of exercises and just creative problem solving. And, it's there that I learned things like, for example, mind mapping, where you've probably done this. You go to a whiteboard and you write all of the different components of a problem, everything that is brought to bear in the problem. And you start drawing lines between the different bubbles of components of that problem. And you start to see connections. And from those connections, sometimes it's weird and I can't explain it, but sometimes you land on a solution because you never saw that two things were connected before. 100% learned that from that class. And so, and then the other thing too is that if I'm writing something, and I just can't get the words to come out. I literally sometimes will go and approach it from a quantitative process. I will run numbers and see if that helps. And so going from right to left brain sometimes provides a breakthrough that I would have never gotten, or just going for a walk and changing your scenery. I mean, I think all of those are great ways to break through that impasse.
I'm not sure you have any of these, but if you do have a free day, there's nothing else on the calendar. What passions do you have outside of credit unions? What do you do to recharge? What does work-life integration look like to you?
Wow, that's such a great question, because you're right. I don't have a lot of free days. But when I do, one thing that if I just want a total immersion in beauty, I go to an art museum, because that's a great passion of mine. But I know you know this about me. I love getting outdoors, and more to the point, I love getting outdoors and doing something active. I like to hike. I like to golf. I love to scuba dive. One of my favorite pictures of all time, by the way, is the selfie that we took in the water in Bali with a volcano going off behind us.
We'll have to, when this episode goes live, we'll have to use that one to promote it a little bit, because that is a ridiculous picture. Yeah, that's for sure. We were safe in the water. Might not have been able to get flights out, but we were safe.
How bad could it get? Right? There is water. Yeah. Yeah. So, and then I'd have to say that for me, that whole work-life balance thing, I know that our mutual friend, Samantha Paxson, has said that it's really more about work-life integration. And, I'm sneaking in little bits of work when I'm waiting at the dentist's office, and I'm sneaking in little bits of fun. Yesterday, I went and took care of some fun stuff during lunch, because I felt like, okay, well, I know I'm going to be working late tonight. And so you just dovetail it all together, and we don't have those hard boundaries between work and play anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's actually how you and I became friends, was we'd be at a conference and sneak away to go scuba dive. So we found out we were divers, right? So they're both divers. Okay. I want to be respectful of your time. I'd like to wrap it up with what I consider to be the fun part, the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid, but your answers don't have to be. Do you remember the first time that you got into memorable trouble?
Well,
that you're willing to share, I guess. How about that?
Oh, I remember a lot of things. But, no, I was the youngest. And so I was a lot more likely to rat out my older brother and sister than to actually get in real trouble myself. But there was this one time when I was in second grade that I swung my Snoopy lunchbox at my friend Kelly Glatt's head.
Oh, boy.
And my mom was furious with me, and I learned a tough lesson that day about, violence. I was 7 years old.
You were 7 and learned it wasn't the answer. So, do you have any daily routines that if you don't do, your day just feels off?
Well, yeah. I mean, even today, even though I knew we had this appointment, I said, I have got to exercise. I have to feel good. And I think it puts me in a different frame of mind. It makes me feel virtuous and powerful and healthy all day long when I do that first thing in the morning. So that's pretty critical.
The random question. What's the best album of all time? The one you can listen to front to back without skipping a song.
So this may shock you or others who know me, but it's Led Zeppelin 4. That older brother and sister who I talked about, they would crank that until they blew out my mom's speakers, back in the day when it was new. And I love that. That is my Desert Island.
I love that. That is a great album. And that's the first time it's been mentioned on the podcast. So it'll be great for the year-end playlist we put together. I know you're a huge live music fan. Favorite concert of all time? And what's the bucket list one that you either hope to get to someday or that you feel like you missed out on?
So my favorite concert of all time, I knew it when it was happening, and that was the Eagles. I think it was 2015. I had somehow never seen them in all of those years that they've been touring, and they're one of my favorite bands. And I literally was in tears during the concert because I thought, I can't believe I've waited this long. They're fabulous in concert. And then 3 months later, Glenn Frey died.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I thought, that's it. There'll never be a better concert than that. because I loved it in the moment, and it really meant even more after hearing that he had passed.
Is there one still on the bucket list?
I still haven't seen the Foo Fighters, and I love them. And I don't even see them touring anymore, but I would love to see them.
Yeah, the one for me that I could never believe that I hadn't seen live was Pearl Jam, and I did a couple of years ago. I don't know how through 20 years of liking their music, I never saw them live. So,
yeah,
but the Foo Fighters would be amazing. I haven't seen them either. As you know, I'm a reader. We have a stack of books around our house from people recommending them to us that we're trying to make our way through. I just saw in something, and I'm drawing a blank on the word, so this is a terrible point of the show, but there's actually a Japanese word for hoarding books that you expect to read someday. Maybe I'll put that in the show notes. Do you have any books that you've gifted or recommended throughout the course of your life?
Yeah, I'm sort of obsessed by 10% Happier by Dan Harris. He had been a Peter Jennings correspondent and covered wars in the Middle East, and he had what he liked to call monkey mind because he had almost ADD from having been on high alert for so many years. And then he found meditation by covering the religion beat for CBS News, and so he finds meditation, and then he's now on the pillow, on the cushion, 2 hours a day. And if someone like Dan Harris can quiet his mind down, I figure there must be hope for me. So I've been recommending that one all over the place.
I have read the book. I have the app on my phone, and I think for people to get a good taste, if I remember correctly, on his website, there's a great video where he talks about that whole process, to suck you in. So we'll link to all that. That is fantastic. I have a hard time getting to 20 minutes of meditation, let alone 2 hours. So that's pretty amazing. As you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And has anything become less? To give this a little bit of context, what advice would you give 25-year-old you?
I used to be fond of saying, fake it until you make it. And I have to say that now that makes me cringe. That may surprise some people, but I had that career where I was faking it until I thought I was going to make it. And then I realized I got called out by a CFO early in my career because I was doing a pitch about a marketing campaign that I wanted to do. And he said, you don't know the first meaning of what ROI is. And I realized I didn't. And so I went back and got my MBA, and I thought, no, I am never getting called out like that again. I'm going to have some street cred. And I'm going to have some foundation for this professional career that I'm trying to build. And so that makes me cringe. And over time, I found that my professional reputation has become more and more important. Everything follows you. And so I agonize when I forget to follow up on something because I feel like that is who I am. I'm good at follow up. And you'd think I'd give myself more grace now that I'm busier, but I just don't want to turn into that person who thinks they're above being considerate and thoughtful.
That's pretty cool. That kind of ties back into what you talked about earlier, though, constantly learning and growing, right? Like you're still educating yourself the whole way through, so you're not faking it. I love it. There's a question I didn't send you. When you hear the word success, who's the first person that comes to mind?
I guess it's Jeff Bezos of Amazon, but I guess he can't be successful at everything because he's going through a really ugly divorce right now.
That is true. Is there something specific about Jeff Bezos that made him instantly pop into your head? Or is it, obviously the richest man in the world for now is not.
Yeah. Well, I love what he did in the way that a lot of others love what he did, that he took a fledgling idea about selling books online and realized that if he did it really well, it could transform into a much bigger business. And I think it's a lesson that a lot of us can take away, that if you do one thing really well, step back and think about how does that translate into another piece of the business? How can we export that idea and, maybe turn it into something much, much bigger and sustainable?
Oh, that is, to me, the perfect way to end. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for being on the show. The last question for you. Do you have any final asks or final thoughts for the audience?
Well, I would just say, let's not be complacent about this movement. And it's important. What we do is important, and providing financial services in this really important sector that we do is critical, and we have to push ourselves to innovate and never be complacent about learning, doing, and being more.
Awesome. We'll link to everything we talked about on the show today in the show notes. So if people don't have to take notes, they can just look below. Is there a preferred way for people to reach you if they have questions? Is email the best, or Twitter, or the social media? Is that
the internet?
The internets? The interwebs?
Yeah. LinkedIn is the best way. Yeah.
Awesome. We will link to that so everybody can find you. Thank you so much again, Caroline, for being on the show. I hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you, Randy.